No, CD Projekt Red did not sell 30 million copies of Cyberpunk 2077. Let's make this very clear that that didn't happen. This game was a complete disaster. It was completely broken. Nobody cared for it. It was a bomb. And yet, 30 million units sold because they kept pushing it, because they kept putting it on clearance. They kept putting it on sale to try and get those numbers up, to try and get the investors on board and gaslight people into thinking that CD Projekt Red was not a company that had just lit itself on fire, but was on the verge of putting out another major hit like The Witcher 3, which was immediately outperformed by Red Dead Redemption 2. Let's not kid ourselves here. CD Projekt Red is done. They are finished. And this is straight out of the PlayStation playbook of just making up numbers that sound impressive without really giving the full context of them. So CD Projekt Red, they are probably doing the same thing that PlayStation did with Horizon Zero Dawn, where they're bundling in copies of the game with other services, where they're counting the DLC as sold copies, where they're counting bargain bin sales, where they're counting like titles that are later returned, like things like this. This is what we call like creative accounting in the industry, where you try and fudge those numbers to make them look more impressive. Like CD Projekt Red sold 30 million copies of a broken, unfinished game. Imagine what they'll do with their next broken, unfinished game. That's the implication. That is what CD Projekt Red is trying to tell its investors, trying to tell the fans, is that they are on the verge of a new success story. Just please keep buying our games and supporting us, and we'll put out something cool. Please ignore the fact that Cyberpunk 2077 is a complete disaster. Like, we love video games. Like, they get the fanboys riled up. You like CD Projekt Red fanboys are so desperate for a W that they seriously tried to push Cyberpunk 2077 as the only worthwhile game on Nintendo Switch 2 day one, which is obviously retarded because, first of all, it's a port, and second of all, it was obviously mogged by the newer games and the better third-party ports, like, relatively quickly. Like, there was this period of time where people would try and tell you that Cyberpunk 2077 was the only worthwhile game on the platform. And of course, that narrative died off pretty quickly because Cyberpunk 2077 is garbage. But, the fact of the matter is that this was the one game that the industry tried to single out and tried to present as being some major deal. This was the game that CD Projekt Red tried to pass off, well, that the gaming journalism industry tried to pass off as the only relevant Nintendo Switch 2 success story, completely, while they were completely like, downplaying Mario Kart World and um let's see, Welcome Tour. Yeah, what else came out day one? All these, like, other games that did really, really well on day one. Street Fighter 6 was a big one. Street Fighter 6 has clearly outperformed Cyberpunk, by the way, if you look at the eShop charts. But anyway, like, we were really supposed to believe that, like, Cyberpunk was like this huge deal, and that it was this huge, like, major, like, defining title on Nintendo Switch 2, because the idea was to present this narrative that CD Projekt Red was one of the best developers in the industry. That, like, a port of a 5-year-old game would stand up to, like, modern Nintendo ones. And obviously that wasn't true. Like, obviously, like, nobody cared about Cyberpunk. It was like basically launch day's equivalent of like Chronos the New Dawn. Like, oh man, it's an M-rated game on Nintendo. I have to get it to prove what a mature adult I am. Oh, like, look, mom, I'm playing this M-rated game in your basement. Oh, aren't you proud of me, mom? Like, I'll never go out and get a job, mom, but at least I'm playing a video game made for adults. That is the mindset of the average person, hyping up Cyberpunk 2077, of hyping up Chronos the New Dawn, of hyping up, Resident Evil Requiem, of hyping up, like, whatever else, like, third party slop comes out on the platform that just sells itself on this idea that it has a good story, or that it's adults. Like, like that's basically what Cyberpunk is just the modern day equivalent of something like Red Dead Redemption or Grand Theft Auto or like Mortal Kombat, where it's like it's a lesser game than the competition, but people are like interested in it for like superficial reasons. Like, oh man, it's so realistic. Oh, look at all the blood. Oh, look at all the animations. Look at the graphics. Like it's stuff like that. Nobody like who plays games would ever like stop and say that like, oh man, Cyberpunk 27, it plays way better than Zelda. Like nobody who has played both would ever say that. And if they did, they would instantly out themselves as frauds. That's kind of like my mentality looking at like the current situation in regards to like Cyberpunk 2077 is that like if you're the kind of person who's still defending Cyberpunk 2077 in 2025, you are just a blind fanboy of CD Projekt Red and can't admit that you were bamboozled, that the game did not live up to expectations. It'd be like if I came out and said that Twilight Princess was the greatest game ever made because I was looking forward to it for so long. Like, no, like I was disappointed with Twilight Princess when it came out, but thankfully I'm a Nintendo fan. So we got better games that year and the year after, all the time we've been getting better games. Like with Cyberpunk 2077, like this is all you got. Santa Claus showed up to your house, gave you coal, and now you're trying to like play with it basically because like you got nothing else. That's CD Projekt Red. Okay, like you've been a bad little gamer, and so Santa has brought you coal to play with on your gaming PC. That's the reality. And like you're just kind of coping with it. You're just kind of sitting there like trying to say like, well, at least it's not Mario Kart World. Like Mario Kart World is probably going to outsell it. Even those insanely obviously fake 30 million sold units, that is significantly less than Nintendo's completely legit like figure for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. That's going to be less than like Mario Kart World's totals total sales. Like it's going to be remarkable seeing all the Nintendo games, Animal Crossing, Tamagotchi, Mario Kart, like potentially Tears of the Kingdom eventually. Like it's going to be crazy seeing all of these games like soar past Cyberpunk 2077. And of course, like it's going to result in what always happens is that people are just going to plug their ears and just kind of refuse to acknowledge it. They're just going to sit there and try and cope and seethe about like, well, Animal Crossing only sold because everyone was stuck inside and they had nothing else to play on their Nintendo Switch. Like you're gonna keep seeing things like that, but it's gonna become like less and less effective, especially as like more and more Nintendo franchises start hitting that like 30 million units sold threshold. Like the more video games hit that number specifically, the more you're gonna see like the entire cope just kind of crumble. Much like Horizon Zero Dawn, Cyberpunk 2077's like success is built on a house of cards. This is not something that will do well with a sequel. It is not something that is ripe for spin-off material or supplementary material. All the hype around Edge Runners is a complete cope, by the way. You're supposed to believe that like CD Projekt Red is still on top of the world when they can't even excel during a Nintendo launch library. Like they didn't even stick out at that point. So like with that being said, like how is this going to end really? Like when are people going to acknowledge that Cyberpunk 2077 is a complete and abject failure? Like I don't think it's going to happen until much like BioWare before it, like people just move on to another RPG franchise, like Locusts, like I think that's why like the industry is like trying so hard to push Western RPGs right now. They pushed Larian in 2023 and now they're pushing like the Expedition 33 guys. Like they're trying to find the next replacement for CD Projekt Red because they know like the follow-up isn't going to be nearly as successful and it's not happening. The days of like some random like Western game coming out of nowhere and like distracting everyone from the and distracting everyone from the far superior Nintendo releases, those are over. They're just not coming back. You are never going to see a repeat of the 2000s period, the 90s and 2000 period, where people were trying to tell you that like Final Fantasy VII was way more mature and sophisticated than Ocarina of Time because it had waifus. You know, you're not going to see people like try and argue that like Xenogears is like deeper than like actual literature. You know, you're not going to see people like try and tell you that like I don't know, that Dante could beat anyone in a fight, or that Kratos is like the best the most tragic video game character ever. Like, it's just never ever gonna happen. You know, that was a period of the time in which a bunch of losers who grew up in the 80s and 90s wanted to feel mature, playing their little video games, their little interactive toys, and so they gravitated to like this overly violent, nonsensical, not bullshit. And these days, these people are gravitating more towards more family oriented stuff. They are gravitating towards the far superior, better designed, more fun to play Nintendo titles. And like Cyberpunk 2077, I think is just a reflection of that period. It is like it is a product of its time. You know, it is, I feel like, one of the last examples we'll see of this like AAA Nintendo killer that we used to get every couple of weeks, you know? Like this, like ever since that game came out, it's been a downward spiral for the AAA industry. And like there really is no recovery from it. You know, people like to blame wokeness. They like to blame PlayStation and Xbox. But at the end of the day, the core issue is that Nintendo is just better than these companies. And honestly, without even really trying that hard.